I'm also a project manager with a company called EagleView here based out in Rochester, New York. We are continuing with our 2018 webinar series that the GIS Association has been putting monthly since the beginning of, or the end of last year rather, and we hope to continue providing you with exceptional webinars and professional development opportunities such as the one we have today. I want to welcome Anita Grasser, exceptional and a well-known expert in the open source GIS community worldwide. I'm very excited and very happy to have her, very glad that she was able to make some time in her extremely busy schedule. And I'm looking forward to this presentation, as I know many of you are. We will have a presentation from Anita and then a Q&A session at the end. We will be recording this webinar and be posting this on the New York State GIS Association website. If you're not a member, I would highly recommend you joining. Only $10 for professionals, $5 for students. Really goes a long way to help us support a lot of the programs and services that we're hoping to bring to the GIS community as well as our membership base. Without further ado, let's get to what we're all waiting for, and that's for Anita to start her presentation. I will turn it over to her, and thank you, and Anita, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rosie. It's a pleasure being here and having this opportunity to join your webinar series and to talk about QGIS today. I've been giving a lot of presentations of QGIS in the last years, but this is definitely the first one that I can give from the comfort of my own living room, so that's certainly a big plus. On the other side, I of course cannot see you as an audience, so I would be glad if you have any questions that you paste it in the chat and we can go into detail and try to answer them after this presentation. My goal today is to introduce you to the QGIS project, how it works, what keeps it ticking, and help you understand what are the different parts, how people are involved, what you can do with it, and to hopefully get you interested enough, if you haven't done so yet, to give it a try. Before I get started with the presentation, I want to take this chance to tell you some things about myself. I'm not actually working in a GIS company or in government. My job is to do research on topics of transportation science. My research group is interested in everything that moves within the transport network, be it pedestrians moving inside a subway station or ships on the open sea. Anything in between is what we are looking at. And as you can certainly imagine, all this movement data is inherently spatial, and there are a lot of use cases which involve GIS tools and functionality, and a lot of research questions also on how to deal with movement data in GIS. I started using QGIS almost 10 years ago. It's my anniversary in a way. And I started because I wanted some GIS tool which I can easily extend myself. So I jumped in at the deep end and became a power user very much from the beginning, because I didn't just want to use the functionality that's in there, but I actually wanted to extend it myself. So I got pretty involved, and that's also how I ended up on the project steering committee in 2013. Which is kind of the governing body of the whole open source project. I've also been serving on the umbrella organization OSGEO's board of directors for 2 years, and you might know my name as well from the Stack Exchange platform, the GIS Stack Exchange platform, which is a common search result if you Google any questions GIS. Nowadays, you probably have ended up there, and I'm helping the community there as a moderator. Beyond that, I've authored a couple of books, authored or co-authored. which cover everything from how to apply your GIS knowledge to QGIS and how to do advanced analysis and make maps with QGIS. Okay, now let's get started. QGIS has been around for quite a while now. It was started in 2002 by our esteemed colleague Gary Sherman. So Gary is one individual who lives in Alaska, and he decided one day that he wanted a viewer for his spatial data, which he had stored in the then also new PostGIS database. And because there was nothing around that he liked, he started developing his own viewer, and he soon published it on the internet, and people joined in, and that's where all the QGIS project started to grow. The first professional users joined pretty early, as you can see. For example, the Canton Solothurn, which is basically a Swiss state, joined in 2005 or around 2006. Also, the Swiss city of Uster joined pretty early, and also some Italian administrations like the region of Tuscany joined in 2009. So we had pretty early professional users in government who drove the development in QGIS and gave us a direction in which to develop, and also, of course, financial support. I already mentioned OSGeo. QGIS is an OSGeo project. We joined them in 2007. And in 2015, we took the next step towards professionalizing the project by founding an association called QGIS.org, which now takes care of all the administrative stuff for QGIS. So the goal of OSGeo, which I mentioned earlier, is to foster the adoption of open geospatial technology in all kinds of areas, in businesses, in education, and in government. And it's a non-for-profit, exactly the same as QGIS. And the most prominent thing for you probably is the conferences that OSGeo organizes, where you can meet people from the QGIS community and all the other open source GIS tools that are out there. At annual conferences, there is a North American one again this year, and there's an international one which will be taking place this year in Africa, and which goes around the world. It's usually one time in Europe, then in North America, and then in one of the other parts of the world before it comes back to Europe. So I highly recommend to visit one of OSGeo's conferences to get introduced to all the great open source projects besides QGIS as well. So obviously when QGIS started in 2002, there were only a couple of people, but as you can see here, the history of the surge interest in QGIS has been steadily rising. From the first Windows release that was somewhere back in 2004, to the OSGeo incubation, to the release of the QGIS 1 version. And we got a really noticeable spike with QGIS 2, which by many is said to be the one which really gave them the kick, where they found that it's finally of such a good quality that they can use it as their main GIS application. And that's when we got many more users, we got many more developers that joined in, and we got also more funding. That's why we started the QGIS.org association, and are trying to continue to grow the community. We also had a big milestone this year, which was the release of QGIS 3, which has a lot of new background improvements and performance improvements, and you should certainly give it a try as well if you haven't used QGIS for a while, try out the new QGIS free. I've also had a look at the same trends, but specifically for some countries. For example, on the left-hand side, you see the trends for Germany, and they look different for many European countries. What you can see there is our most well-known competitor on the commercial side of the GIS world from the United States. And you can see that in Germany, at least, the QGIS search trends have very well caught up with commercial GIS. In the US, I have to say, which you can see on the right side, there's still some room for improvement there. We can certainly still work on that, and we are working on that. But it is rising, and we are very optimistic that we will also get to where we are in Europe with our trends and our market penetration. So QGIS is certainly the most popular open source desktop GIS, but it's important to stress that QGIS is not just a desktop application. It's a whole open source project, and it also offers components like a server component and web clients which help you to publish your spatial data on the web. And you can even have customized or specific QGIS-based applications for data collection in the field. Some of those I have listed here: QField, Intramaps Roam, which are improved to work on mobile devices so that you can take them out in the field and collect your data or edit your data. The desktop application and the server application are available for Linux, Windows, and Mac OS X. And there's even a port to Android. And one of the big things that we are very proud of is that the application has been translated already in over 40 languages. And that also is one of our success factors, I think, that people can use the GIS application in the language that they are used to, which is not always the case in commercial offerings because it's not the main focus of those companies. I spoke a bit about the history. Of course, we also have a lot of plans upcoming. There's going to be a developer meeting at Zanzibar right before the big international Phos4G conference that is in Dar es Salaam. And we are planning to release the first long-term release version of QGIS later this year, of the third version of QGIS later this year. It's currently scheduled for October. So the idea of those long-term releases is that if you are developing a training course or if you want to install QGIS at a university, in IT labs, or in a company that is a bit on the conservative side, then we recommend to use the long-term release, which gets updates for at least a year, bug fix updates, but is stable in that there is no new features added to it all the time, and the interface is stable. So this is the way to go if you don't need always the bleeding edge latest version of QGIS, but still want to be using modern GIS. One of the things I really like to stress is that an open source project is not just made out of developers. This is a common misconception for people who are not familiar with with how open source projects work. So that's why I always show this slide. Obviously, we have a lot of developers in the project. One thing that's probably noticeable about QGIS is that there is not one big company or research group somewhere that steers the development of the project, but instead we have a lot of developers in many different, often small to medium-sized companies all around the world who contribute to QGIS. And they get their funding from their clients and contribute to the software project. So the general idea is that none of those companies individually would have been able to develop GIS from scratch. But by sharing it the open source way, they can all contribute, make their customers happy, and overall everyone profits from a GIS that is really fast, improving, and developing. So besides the developers, I already mentioned that we have translations in over 40 languages, so there's a ton of people who do the translations. We have people in the background who make sure that all our infrastructure works, so that you can download the installers, so that the documentation is available online, and that the issues that are reported are managed and responded to. Then we have a great team of documentation writers who are always busy because there's far fewer documentation writers than developers, and all the developers that we have and all the great features that they implement, they need to be documented. So that's certainly a field where we could use more manpower and woman power as well to help write this documentation. It's also a great way to learn about QGIS and the latest features by trying to write them down and to explain them to others. What I also want to list here are the community managers. That's what I call people who make sure that if you write to the mailing list with a question, that you get an answer. Those are also the people who organize events such as the developer meetings or smaller user-centered events, and all those things that we have going on in our community. Then another thing you need are designers. You need someone who has a knack for user interface, someone who looks at the websites and keeps them up to date. So that's certainly somewhere where people who feel like maybe they don't feel comfortable to develop, contribute something technical or in writing, where people like that could get involved as well. Then another part of our community are the users, and the users are actually very, very important as well, because you might not know that, but a lot of the developers and other people invested in QGIS, they are not heavy users of the application. So it's really important to have this user feedback from people who use the application, who have specific workflows, who can compare it to other applications, and who provide feedback about what works well, what doesn't work well, if there are any issues, to describe them and make them reproducible, and work together with the developers to make QGIS a better application. And I already mentioned our events. None of those would be possible without our donors and sponsors who provide us with the funds to pay for our infrastructure, to have those events where developers get together and meet face to face, as opposed to just on mailing lists as it happens during the rest of the year. So big shout out as well to our donors and sponsors. You're doing a great job. And last but not least, at the bottom I have the project steering committee, which I'm currently serving on. And the role of the project steering committee is to just make sure that everything is running as smoothly as we can organize it, and to look after all kinds of legal things, to pay for the servers, and whatever else has to be done to make the project run. Here's here's a picture from one of the recent developer meetings that we had in Germany at the Linux Hotel in Essen. As you can see, it's a really nice group of people who all came, many of them in their free time, to meet face to face to discuss ongoing topics and decide on how to work together to advance the project. One thing, if you now think, I want to give this a try, and if you haven't started out yet with QGIS, is to go to docs.qgis.org. There are a lot of free documentation on there for all kinds of levels. And of course, by now, there is also a lot of books that you can have a look at for people who with no GIS background to people with GIS background who just want to get started in QGIS, up to really advanced analysis things. Everything should be covered in one of those books. If you're a company, or if you think that for you to introduce QGIS you need more support than what you can get from open mailing lists, which are very responsive and kind to newbies as well, you also have options for commercial support. On the right-hand side, you see those companies who offer commercial support for QGIS and also employ one of our core developers. Obviously, there are many more companies than I could fit on this slide, and you can find them all on the QGIS website. So there is support, commercial support, so that goes down to having someone on the phone for you to reach during office hours and beyond is definitely available, and those companies cover almost all continents from Australia to Europe to the United States. You will find someone in your time zone who speaks your language and who you can contact if you have any support questions, or if you need some new feature developed, because that's another thing that those companies do, obviously, to make money. Besides those company and their clients driving the development for new features and innovations, there is also another movement in the QGIS project, which are the user groups. And they are really growing in importance, and I will get to them soon. There are many national user groups. There's one in the US, there's one in Australia, but there's also some in South Africa or Kenya or Georgia, so all over the place. And the new QGIS organization in the association, they have a really important role because they have voting members who decide who's on the project steering committee, who's on the board of the association, who chairs the board, and who does the financial auditing of the association. And beyond that, they also get to vote on what we spend our money on, so the money that comes from the donors and sponsors. We have a grant program for improvements and developments, and the representatives of the user groups plus elected community members get to decide which of those grants are funded, which is really important to decide where we put our priorities. So the user groups, some of them have been around for a long time. They have been organizing local conferences, which are specifically focused on QGIS. And another thing that they do very successfully is to pool money from their members. If they have a certain requirement which might be specific to their country, for example, if you have a certain data format which is only really used in your country and you want support for this data format, then you can pool some money in your user group, and once you have enough, you can contact a developer to get this feature implemented. This is one of the big advantages, obviously, of the open source approach, with so many different companies offering to do improvements and enhancements, because you're not tied to one individual company. You're not tied to the one company that sells you the application. You can go to someone else if they are busy or if they are not interested in your project. you take it somewhere else and they will implement it for you. So also as a user, you have more freedom of how you get things done with open source applications. Let's get into who uses QGIS, and I just picked a handful of examples because there are just too many users to talk about. For example, I just recently learned that the US Census is distributing their own copy of QGIS, which they named GUPS, Geographical Update Partnership Software. And it's something that you can download from their website, and when you start to install it, you notice, it's QGIS basically. So that's one of the things that the open source license allows. It's for them to redistribute it, to brand it with a different name, and to hand it out to their users to view spatial data. That's a really nice example that I just learned about recently. Another great example that is, I think it's now 2 years old, is the use of QGIS by the Swiss Army. The Swiss Army contacted one of our core developers to make a customized version just for their specific military use cases. And you can see here a screen. It is very streamlined. There is only a couple of functions that you see on first sight, and it looks completely different than the standard QGIS application. But in the background, the code is very much the same. It's mostly a different front end, some streamlining of the workflows, and it's a great example of what you can do customizing open source and making it your own, even in a military setting. There's also tons of people who are using it in journalism. For example, I have a few links here from the Financial Times, which actually uses it a lot and also is very open about that they use it and they advertise it. It's also used in Austria, here where I am, by the national TV channel for data management and for visualizations, and in Germany and all kinds of other places around the world where tourists are using it. So after these examples, I also don't want to hide what are the challenges of an open source project like QGIS. One of the things that we deal with is that QGIS is developed bottom-up. I already mentioned that there is no one entity at the top which decides in which direction QGIS has to go. Instead, it is very much driven by the demands of the users who get in contact with the developers, and they decide that a certain feature is needed, and then it will be developed. So one of the things we try to ensure is to avoid having multiple parties working on the same thing without them knowing of each other's work. So we try to get them together to discuss the plans that they have about development in advance, to find the best, all the common things that they need, and to integrate it into one solution instead of having different approaches cropping up by surprise. So that is one thing that is necessary for us to do. Another thing that keeps us busy is that QGIS.org, the association, does not have any employees. So the board or the project steering committee does not have any direct influence on any of the developers. Because they are not our employees, we usually don't pay them, except for bug fixing rounds and other things, which I will talk about in a second. And this can be a source of some confusion or discussions, because obviously you have the interests of the project on the one hand and the interests of the individual companies on the other hand, which need to be dealt with. Because the QGIS developers, most of them are either self-employed or they work for small businesses in their own FOSS-GIS companies. And so there's a lot of people and a lot of different interests. Also, our funds are limited. The budget in 2017 was around 100,000 euros, which is around 120,000 US dollars. And that's the money we have to pay for the infrastructure, to do marketing, to try to support the documentation team. And most of it goes to bug fixing and quality assurance for improving the application. And we are very open about how we spend our money. You can find the financial report for 2017 and previous years online. And you will see that how much money we spend on bug fixing, how much money we spend on the events, how much we spent on paying people to work on the documentation, and also where our money comes from, obviously. And one of the really nice statistics on the left-hand side is our source of money, and we are lucky in that way because our number of sponsors is still growing, and we hope to grow it further, so that maybe eventually we will be able to employ someone full-time to improve the quality of the application further, to fix bugs and all those things. One of the initiatives that we started and is now in the third round is the QGIS grant program. Because if you have 100,000 euros, of course, you have to think of some way how to spend it responsibly. And I already mentioned when I was talking about the user groups that the representatives of those user groups get to decide which of the grant proposals get funded. And this is our way to distribute the decision-making process amongst the community instead of the project steering committee deciding on what should be done with the money. And here are some examples of the projects that have been funded, which is improving user interface consistency, improving test coverage for the code, really exciting 3D functionality, which is now in QGIS 3, and also improvements for data management with Postgres databases and documentation and all those things which are difficult to get paid by individual customers and clients, but can be funded in this community-driven way. So with that, I'm very glad that I have finished the general QGIS part. And I want to go into a bit more detail about the analysis side of things. If you have used QGIS before, you probably have heard of the processing toolbox. It's the main go-to place in QGIS if you want to do a spatial analysis. If you open it, it will open on the right-hand side as shown in this screenshot, and you will see there are tons of tools, and you might be a bit lost on first sight, but give it a try. It's really powerful. It has integration with a lot of different open source solutions. Like here you can see on this list in the bottom, after all those QGIS internal algorithms, you have tools for spatial analysis from the GDAL library, from GIS, and there are many, many others that can be integrated as well, for example, from Saga or from Orfeo Toolbox and many more, or from plugins that you install, which we haven't even talked about yet. QGIS has tons of plugins that extend its functionality further. So on first sight, you have a list with all those great tools. And if you're looking for something specific, don't worry. There is a search bar at the bottom, at the top here. And if you start typing there, you can see, like here, that the list will shorten and it will show you only the relevant search results. And that should be a really fast way to find if a certain tool is available in your toolbox. You will also find these search bars in many other places in QGIS. For example, there's a search bar here in the bottom left of the application, which allows you to search for functions, for layers, for features within layers. So this is like the master search. And there are searches as well in the settings windows if you look for a certain setting. And of course, in the plugin manager, if you're looking for plugin to do a specific task, you will also find one of those search bars to have a look and to be quicker to find your plugins. If you start one of those tools by double-clicking on it in the toolbox, the dialogues will look like this. So you have a lot of inputs on the left-hand side, and there should be also a documentation right next to it, or via the help button in the bottom right corner, where you can read up on how the tool is supposed to work and where to find further information about it. Besides using all those tools individually, there is also a way to automate all those processes without going all the way to actually program something. There's the processing modeler, where you combine in a graphical user interface some inputs, some algorithms, for example here to add an incrementing field like a feature ID to a data set, and this will create some outputs that can be stored in all kinds of different file formats or directly to a database if you want to, or just into some temporary memory layer if you're not yet sure how you want to continue and if you actually want to save the results. If you're more of a programming person, if you're comfortable with Python, you don't need to use this graphical user interface. Instead, you have the full freedom of using all the processing tools that I've shown to you, also from the Python console, where you provide the names of the algorithms and the arguments that you would also input in the user interface. And it will run from the console. You can make loops to batch process things, and you can build more intelligence around it to make automated workflows that can be really, really complex if you wish to. Beyond that, of course, you are not limited to the existing tools. Instead, you can also write your own ones in Python. There is a scripting tool which helps you with there's a basic outline, and you just fill in the intelligence of the algorithm that you want to add to QGIS. And this is a really neat way to expand it, and we use that a lot in research. When we want to try new approaches, we prototype them as QGIS scripts for the processing toolbox before we go and maybe make a plugin or some standalone application, which is more work than just trying out some things in this custom scripts. One of the things that I did in that way is the so-called edge bundling tool. There the goal is to make nicer visualizations to clean up this mess of, here you can see taxi trips, taxi pickups connected to drop-offs going to the island of Manhattan. And the idea of the edge bundling script that I implemented, and which you can also find online and on my blog, is to bundle those flows together and to show you in a more clear way where are most connections, where is the highest demand for moving to Manhattan, or the other way around, to leave Manhattan. And this is one thing that can be implemented with processing. It takes the original straight lines and makes these bundles and displays them again in the QGIS application. Beyond this, if you're interested in other use cases that have already been covered, you can go to the case studies section of the QGIS website. I've just picked a couple of things that you might be interested in. For example, in Italy, people have been using it to model geologically unstable zones, so areas where the slopes of the mountainsides are steep and not covered by vegetation. They are computing indices and automatically analyzing which areas are in danger for movement of masses and to take precautionary steps in those areas. In a similar area, there is a lot of hydrological tools that you can find in the processing toolbox. They mostly come from the integration with the QGIS and can be used, for example, to model runoff and catchment areas of rivers. And so you can also use that for ecological modeling. And there's a lot of work going on in that area. One of the things that I've been using a lot in QGIS, because it's related to transport, is the network analysis library. So here we can also calculate reachability from a certain point in the city. You can use that for marketing purposes, for finding ideal shop locations, for analyzing reachability to the public transport networks. All those things are possible with the network analysis tools in QGIS. And that's one of the things I really like about it. Also, there is now in QGIS 3 some really nice ways to plot, to make diagrams. So here I have a more unusual kind of diagram with this triangle chart where you can actually visualize 3 variables, which are attributes of the trees that I have on my map on the left-hand side. So here you have the diameter of the tree trunk and the size of the tree on the top. And that's a really great way, without you exiting QGIS, without going to Excel or some other application, to have some other way to visualize the data, not just the map itself. And another thing that I've been very involved in is the topic of visualizing spatiotemporal data. So this is a plugin I've been starting to develop, I think 8 years ago already. It's called the Time Manager plugin, and it allows you to create animations from your spatiotemporal data. And I really encourage you to visit the website and to look at the examples from many different people who have been using it to visualize, for example, movement of the public transportation network in the public transportation network, or changes of crop yields, or troop movements in some historic wars. So anything that is has a timestamp and a spatial geometry can be visualized with Time Manager, and that's one of my pet peeves and one of the projects that I continue to maintain in QGIS. So I didn't want to miss the chance of sharing that with you. So last but not least, if you are interested, and I would highly encourage you to find a way to contribute to the project. It's really easy. You can start by providing feedback. If you encounter some issues, please report them. Only a known issue can be fixed. If we don't know about it, there is no way of us fixing it. You can help translating into your own language, or as I mentioned, documenting new features, which is a great way of learning about new things. You can help by raising funding either via your national user group or in some other way by making sure that your company becomes a sponsor, for example. You can go on the mailing list or on GIS.stack Exchange and answer user questions to help the community grow. And of course, if you're skilled in development, you can help fix issues and develop new features, which of course is also very appreciated in our project. And I highly recommend reading the blog post at the bottom of this slide from Niall Dawson, one of our most prolific developers, where he describes exactly how you can get things done and changed in QGIS. It's a great summary. So with this, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions, and it's been a pleasure being with you here today. Thank you.
Anita, thank you very much. Does everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. So I want to thank Anita again for excellent presentation. We are now in the Q&A portion of our presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box so that we can have Anita go through those one by one. There was one question that came up earlier. Would you be able to share your presentation slides with us so that we can share with the rest of the attendees after the presentation?
Yes, of course, I will make the PDF available.
Okay, yeah, you can email that to me, Anita, and I'll forward that to our communication committee. Mm-hmm. So again, questions, please send your questions to the text box. We have our first question from Doug Newcomb. Can you do iteration in the modeling tool?
So the current generation of the modeling tool does not support iterations, but you can do iterations very easily if you go the Python way. So in the console, you can obviously write loops and do iterations over the different tools. And you don't have to be too worried about understanding how to use those tools in Python, because there is actually a really nifty history in processing which shows you exactly for all the tools that you used via the graphical user interface. It records the settings and you can copy paste the correct Python code from there to the Python console and just run it again or make a loop around it. So it's really good way to get started applying some Python knowledge and to do looping and batch processing.
Thank you, Anita. The next question, Rolando Castillo. Yes, we will be sharing a copy of the PDF. We will share that with the attendees to today's webinar, as well as it will be posted on the New York State GIS Association website. The second one, is there a resource that you can share for people who are just starting to learn QGIS? And Anita,
that's
I know you shared with question. Us a whole. Yes.
Yeah, as you already said, tried to say that I shared with you a long list of all kinds of resources that I'm sure will be on your website, and on the main QGIS site there is a documentation setting which includes getting started with GIS tutorial list, which is really, it doesn't assume any prior GIS knowledge, but it gets you started by introducing GIS concepts and QGIS at the same time. But if you're more looking for a quick start because you already know all the GIS basics and you just want to learn about GIS, about QGIS, then I would recommend my book, Learning QGIS, because then you are exactly the target audience that I had in mind for it. It does not re-explain you what is a vector layer and what is a raster layer, but it immediately goes into, okay, if you have a text file with latitude and longitude values, you need to do this and that to get it on the map.
Thank you, Nina. Next question. How difficult is it to get acclimated to QGIS if you've primarily worked in ArcGIS, and how similar or different is QGIS from ArcGIS Pro?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's been a while since I last used ArcGIS. I did so during my studies, but for the last 6 years I haven't used it. Most of the things I heard is that people find it pretty straightforward and very similar in the workflows. Some of the workflows, particularly in map design, are a bit different, but I think no less efficient in QGIS once you get the knack of it. About ArcGIS Pro, I really have no first-hand experience of where they are right now in their development cycle and how well that works yet. So I can't compare with Pro.
Thank you, Anita. Again, if you have any questions, please type those into the text box. Our next question here, is the force directed edge bundling active in QGIS 3.0?
Edge bundling, one of the tools I have already ported to the QGIS 3 application programming interface. It's currently available on GitHub. I haven't published it yet on the official plugin website, but it's certainly on my to-do list. But if you want to already try it out, you can find a post on my blog where I also link to the code. So you can definitely give that a try as well.
Thank you, Anita. I don't see any additional questions. I'm assuming everyone, unless I'm missing something. Sorry, there are actually a few questions. One second, I apologize. That's what I'm talking about. I know there has to be more questions. What is the area where QGIS outshines ARC the most, and vice versa?
That's an excellent question. I would have to say it's the community, but of course you want to know features, right? So lately, what you should really try, if you haven't yet, is the QGIS styling panel, which is a panel just on the side next to the map, and you can see all your changes applied to the map in real time. So it's super fast to try different colors, different approaches for the style. There is also a super powerful feature which is a bit difficult to explain without pictures, which is called the geometry generator. For example, you can have a point layer which contains locations of your stores, and without having to create a separate layer for lines, or you could visualize the connections between the stores if they have to send goods from one location to the other. Just a few expressions in a geometry generator. I really encourage you to check out the examples that I have on my blog. I think that's something that you don't find in any other GIS. So without having to create any intermediate layers just for data visualization, you can do really powerful stuff.
Thank you. Next question from Jordan here. How to make people from USA to use, contribute, and engage to QGIS projects more?
Excellent. Yeah, that's also one thing I have been asking myself. Why is it that we have so many users, such a high percentage also of GIS users who use QGIS in other places but not in the US? And one of my theories is that it stems from the fact that people in the US are probably pretty happy with their commercial providers. They are used to, at least I think, they're used to their GIS provider also being at least their base map provider, which is something that we don't have in other parts of the world, where people have always had the GIS provider on the one hand side, but they had to look for the data from some other sources because they couldn't get it from some portals from the same source. So this is a common misconception that I hear mostly from users from America, that they feel like open source GIS is somehow inferior because it doesn't come with data out of the box. And well, that's something we provide software, but the data has to come from the user. So maybe that's an obstacle to people using open source software because they are not used to sourcing their base maps, or they are just happy with the support that they get. I assume that the support situation is better in the Americas than in other countries.
Thank you. And this question is for the association here. I'll just answer real quickly. This cookie meeting software is very frustrating. It has kicked me out more than 6 times. I apologize, Lee, for the inconvenience and the technical difficulties you're dealing with, and for anyone else. Just so you know, appreciate the feedback. We will be looking at other webinar services in the future. So just wanted to address that. Next question, back to Anita. Can network analysis be used for an existing utility networks? Example, electric, gas, etc.
I have seen specialized plugins which deal with things like wastewater management and also electricity infrastructure management with QGIS. There are some user groups like the Swiss user group who are particularly involved in improving this side of things. It's not my personal focus, so I don't know how far those things are advanced yet, but there is certainly a lot of movement going on also in that direction. So I encourage you to check out those groups which try to work on improving these aspects of the application.
Next question. Is there a maximum coverage location problem tool in the latest QGIS?
If I understand correctly, that would be aiming at solving optimization problems. So like, for example, if you can open 6 store locations, where should you put them to reach the most customers? If that's the angle of the question, then I think the correct answer is that this is not currently supported because we don't have any optimization framework built in yet. But that would certainly be a great topic for a plugin. If it doesn't yet exist, I'm not aware of it at least.
Anita, we have a few additional questions. Would you be willing to continue answering these now, or would you rather answer them offline and then we can provide them to the rest of the attendees?
I think it's fine if we do 5 or 10 more minutes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Next question. With the new developments in 3D mapping in QGIS, what do you think are the next steps? Future developments for editing and visualizing three-dimensional 3D data?
Yeah, editing is definitely a huge topic. If I'm not mistaken, there is also currently an ongoing crowdfunding initiative with features that are currently missing from the very first, basically, implementation of QGIS 3D support that we have now. So if you're interested also professionally in the 3D mapping side, please consider supporting this crowdfunding platform. Many of the recent big developments have been crowdfunded, and the developers work together with their funders to make sure that everyone who wants to contribute can find some way to do so. And one thing that I would like to see, of course, would also be integrating 3D mapping in the map publication process, which is not covered by the functionality implemented so far, but would certainly be of great value. And also to do animations in 3D, for example. That's what I would be looking forward to.
Next question. Are geology cross sections possible?
The only cross sections I've seen so far were people doing it with custom code. There are some examples that you can find on Stack Exchange. As far as I'm aware, there is no plugin that does it out of the box. But there are people who are working on boreholes, borehole visualization, and I think there's also some professional companies behind interested in improving those tools and making it available.
Thank you. We've got a question here, AR. We got your updated question. Does QGIS do interpolation based on network distances?
Okay, so does that mean
Interpolation based on network distances?
Yeah, I don't think there is such a thing. So you have the regular interpolation with inverse distance. As far as I remember, those don't do network distances yet. No.
Next question. Next question. What was the, if I'm not mistaken, Orfeo Toolbox at QGIS 3? There is no possibility to use that right now? That's the first part of the question.
That's correct. It's currently not included in QGIS 3 because the developers in both projects are currently working on the best way of how ensuring integration of these third-party tools in the processing toolbox. There have been some different ideas of how this could be achieved in the new QGIS 3 framework. And as far as I've seen the discussions advance, they have now settled on one approach and they are working on it. And I think it will be available in the next release, which will be 3.2. And coming back to the interpolation on the network, I think it is possible via the GRASS integration in QGIS, because GRASS also has a lot of network analysis tools, and I think they have one for interpolation along the network distance as well.
Thank you. The second part of that individual's question, what is your favorite tool or software for image processing and change detection based on satellite imagery?
Unfortunately, that's one of the fields that I have not been working on nearly as much as I would have hoped to, because it just does not come up in my research. But there are a couple of great plugins, at least based on the feedback that I get and see online. So the semi-automatic classification plugin for QGIS, which I think is also already available for 3.0, does a great job at image classification. And I'm not sure about change detection, but I would certainly start looking there. And if you need something specific, check with the mailing lists.
Does QGIS have tools to compute service areas, isochrones, given GTFS data as input?
GTFS public transport data, yeah, that would be something I would love to see. It has been on my to-do list, unfortunately not with a very high priority. So if anyone's interested in developing that, that would be really great, but so far it's not integrated, no.
Next question, Wayne Howard. Will you soon be upgrading any of your books to cover QGIS 3.0?
Excellent question. Yes, we are, Gretchen Peterson and we are already working on updating our QGIS map design book to 3.0, or more specifically to the next long-term release version, which will be out in October, as I mentioned. So this is also the date that we are targeting for the release of the updated version of QGIS map design. And I also know that many of the other books are currently in the process of being updated.
Thank you. Next question. How can we form a user group in our country? Does it specify which country? Yes, our country, and a user group.
Okay, so if you're from the US, then there is already one. If you're from a country which was not on the list yet, the details are mainly up to you. For some general guidelines, you can visit the QGIS website, which has examples of statutes of the Swiss user group, so that you can see what they defined as their goals. And you can also get in touch with Lene Fischer, who's currently in the chat and who has started a user group in Denmark. I'm sure she will be happy in giving you tips on how to organize this thing and how to get recognized as an official QGIS user group, which includes a voting member, don't forget. Please get in touch with anyone of the community, and I'm sure you will get a lot of pointers on how to proceed.
Thank you, Anita. We've got a few more questions. We should be wrapping up soon. Just not a question, but rather someone says, thank you, excellent presentation, motivates me to get more familiar with QGIS. So just wanted to share that.
Wow, that's great.
Next question, an example, K nearest neighbors based on distances in the street network rather than straight line distance. So I think this is referring to interpolation based on network distances question.
Yeah,
so
that's
neighbors based on distances.
That goes in the same direction as the previous interpolation question. Yes. No, I don't think we have that yet, but it would be great.
Okay,
if you know
got
some
a couple of posts here for tips. Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
No, please go, Anita.
I just wanted to mention that if you happen to know any open source tools which already provide this functionality, please let us know, and we could look into if there is a way how to integrate it into QGIS so you can use it from inside QGIS as well.
Excellent. I'm looking here. I think I see one question, maybe two. I was an ArcMap user in the new version of QGIS. How is the best way to work correlations with the vegetation index? Can you share some information with me? So vegetation index correlation.
Unfortunately, that's really not my area of expertise, and I would have to ask you to take that to the user mailing list and find some experts who can give you advice. I'm sure you can find someone there.
Thank you, Anita. I believe here the last question. What can we process to become an official QGIS user group? We are in Togo and we promote QGIS.
So if you have already started your user group, I recommend sending an email to the project steering committee and introduce yourself. And there are a couple of questions that we will ask you about what are your goals, who are your representatives, how are you organized, and then we will work out what are the steps to make you an official user group. But the most important thing is get into contact with the project steering committee, and we will let you know how to advance.
Thank you, Anita. So we got a couple of links and tips from Len Fisher related to user groups, as well as some video tutorials. Anyone can go check those out. Anita, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. Thank you for your time on behalf of the New York State GIS Association, the GIS community here in the United States, Northeast, and all the attendees. Anything else you'd like to add, Anita, before we sign off? Would you like to share anything else? Anything you'd like to remind the audience?
No, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks for giving me the chance to present to your community, and I hope we will see a lot of the people who were here today contribute and get into touch with the QGIS community. And happy QGISing.
Excellent. Thank you, Anita. We, again, appreciate everyone's attendance. Big shout out to Anita and her efforts and the open source community. Please show some love to them and reach out, and ask questions. And as in part of the GIS Association, keep in line of our upcoming webinars. We have a few more. We have one, each month coming up, lined up for those. So please consider attending those in the future. And appreciate everyone's time, and appreciate again, Anita, for your time as well. So with that, I'll be signing off. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll keep this up for people to continue sending in their thank yous to Anita and all that. So excellent, and thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.